Hello and welcome to Critical Readings, episode 332 for the 20th of July, 2026. I'm Dr. Sean Philip Cooper, and with me today I have two panelists. They are Lane Haygood
Hello.
and Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
Salutations.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Well, today we're going to be looking at the second fifth of the third book of The Once and Future King, which is The Ill-Made Knight, chapters 9 through 18. And we're going to get right to that. But we're going to remind our listeners that if you'd like to see us record this live or stream it live or have early access to it or provide conversation and discussion on a wide variety of critical readings related topics, you can become a patron by going to criticalreadings.com and clicking Become a Patron at the top of the page, and we'll send you an invite to our private members Discord community. We look forward to seeing you there, and we'll put your name in the credits for as long as you're a supporter. With that said, it's time to get to the second part of our reading here, and I'm going to actually turn this over to my panelists this week because last week I gave us a long summary and I got us up to, I think, to the part where Lancelot met Guinevere. And I wanted to say that what came after, of course, is that Lancelot hurts Guinevere at the end of chapter 4 and they fall in love at the beginning of chapter 5, somewhere in between that page break. Love blooms. And what happens next is that Lancelot is told off by Uncle Dap, and Arthur pretends not to notice, although he's been made aware of it. White points this out because that's in Mallory. And what does he do? He decides he needs to separate himself from the court and go on adventures in order to keep himself away from Guinevere. All right, Drew. So where should we look in chapters 9 through 18? What fascinated you? We've heard about what fascinates me.
Well, he does go off, and when he comes back, the situation is all the worse. And that is revealed right off the bat in chapter 9.
Mm-hmm.
It begins with this bit of musing from White. It is difficult to explain about Guinevere unless it is possible to love two people at the same time. Well, of course it is. Why? I mean, that happens all the time. But he spends, some time musing on this question. Probably it is not possible to love two people in the same way, but there are different kinds of love. Women love their children and their husbands at the same time, and men often feel a lusty thought for one woman while they are feeling a love of the heart for another. In some way, such as this, Guinevere did come to love the Frenchman without losing her affection for Arthur. She and Lancelot were hardly more than children when it began, and the king was about 8 years their senior. At 22, the age of 30 seems like the verge of senility. The marriage between her and Arthur had been what they call a maid marriage. That is to say, it had been fixed by treaty with King Leodegrus without consulting her. It had been a successful union, as maid marriages generally are. And before Lancelot came on the scene, the young girl had adored her famous husband, even if he was so old. She had felt respect for him, with gratitude, kindness, love, and a sense of protection. She had felt more than this. You might say that she had felt everything except the passion of romance. Well, and this is the problem. She admires Arthur. She doesn't feel any passion for Arthur.
Admires him, cares about his well-being, is interested in advancing him and protecting his legacy. Everything except for romantic passion. I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. Many successful relationships, countless ones through human history, have been based on precisely this.
It's not a problem in general. It's a problem. It sets the stage for the problem
Yes,
in this novel.
I see. Yes.
It creates the opportunity for what happens. And I think White is, I mean, it's almost charming in a sense, the kind of simplicity of his perspective on this. Is it possible to love two people at the same time? Have you read human literature?
Ambisexual,
You have any
bisexual?
experience?
Is it possible? Well, I mean, but he's taking a very rigorous attitude about love, right? Like,
Oh, yes, yes. In that
what?
British schoolboy kind of way.
Yes, right. Let's
strict
break it
categories.
down into logical parameters, right? Let's construe love, and that's what he does. That's why he says what he concludes, as if reasoning about love from first principles. He concludes it is not, in fact. Like, imagine St. Thomas Aquinas writing something similar, like, I reply that it is not, in fact, possible to love two people in the same way. However, I answer that it is possible to love two people in different ways. And that is what he concludes. I think there's something somewhat persuasive about this. It depends on how it really depends on what you mean by love. And, white doesn't mean lust, right? I mean, the philanderers have had lots of, women at the same time throughout history. So it's possible to lust after more than one woman at a time, but is it possible to love? And I think for White, his definition of love makes that an impossibility. He eventually concludes, and we have to work back from that. I think we have to do that to understand what White means by love, because he doesn't tell us. He talks around it. There are things that are included in love, and we get them in his depiction of Guinevere and Arthur's marriage. Like, these are the things that are included in a certain kind of love. And romantic passion is included as well, but not in this, because this is a different kind of love, right?
His definitional strictness is also perhaps lurking behind it has been a successful union as made marriages generally are.
Yeah.
Well, most cultures that have prearranged marriages also don't allow for separation.
Yeah.
They could all look successful in the sense that they all continue indefinitely,
I
or
think
that
he
they
means that they're not
find ways to avoid open conflict because you can't get out of it.
Well, they don't. I think what he means is they don't dislike each other, right? Like, they're not. She doesn't not care about him. She doesn't not want to advance his. I mean, think about Henry II of Eleanor and Eleanor of Aquitaine in Becket, right? That's not a successful marriage, although it is successful at the level of the polity. Like, they despise each other.
That's a highly successful union.
Yeah,
political union.
Political union.
Exactly. Great tracts of land.
She tells Henry, I gave you my youth. I gave you my virginity. I gave you these children. And he's like, your love is as dried up flower. And as for my children, I don't like my children. So, they don't like each other. And although it's politically successful, I don't think White would call that successful as made marriages go. But Arthur's is different. Like, they are happy, right? She's happy to be the queen. She admires her husband. She likes him. She cares about him. She wants to advance his causes. He cares about her. He likes her. He wants to protect her. He's interested in her as a person. They just aren't sexually attracted to each other. It's not like that fire.
Which is not really a necessity for this kind of a made marriage.
Indeed.
Only necessary that they produce heirs, which they fail to do for whatever reason. But it's not his observation about their made marriage that I find perhaps objectionable. It's his statement that as made marriages generally are. I wonder how many people in made marriages White asked about this before he arrived at that general conclusion.
Well, maybe he's thinking about, like, politically. He's not thinking, as White is so often not doing, he's not thinking about the hoi polloi. He's not thinking about people in the Middle East who are being forced to just child brides and things like that. I suspect he's thinking about medieval.
He makes broad generalizations about all of humanity on the basis of British
European aristocracies made marriages, right? And
that's very, very British of him.
It is.
Yes, exactly. The chauvinism is coming through.
And measured by that metric, European made marriages, some of them did go terribly awry, but often they were perfectly fine. That's how the aristocracy carried on. That's why it still exists. They worked. All right. Well, that's a really great way to begin, Drew. Now, what about the nature of her Guinevere's relationship with Lancelot? Because it is different. She is in love, two different kinds of love. She's got the love with Arthur, but what about the love with Lancelot? There is romance.
When Lancelot finally comes before the king and queen who are sitting in session, he's presenting all these captives, all these prisoners, and he says, well, the king is acting quite jovial and chummy. "Well, Lance," said Arthur cheerfully, "these are some hijinks, and make no mistake about it, Jenny can hardly sit still with all her captives." Lancelot replies, "They were for her." The queen and he did not look at each other. They had done so with the click of two magnets coming together the moment that he crossed the threshold. And the king says, "I can't help thinking they were for me too. The result ought to be that you have made me a present of about 3 counties." And then they shift off into a different conversation. But that moment there is quite packed, densely packed, where he simply says, "I did all of this for her." It's ironic since he left in order to stop thinking about her, but apparently that did not succeed.
Indeed. Well, this is the thing. White tells us it's the thing he allowed himself. Right. His forbearance has its limits. He couldn't be with Guinevere, and every step he took away from her was torture. But he would send the captives back to kneel at her feet. And of course, this did not make her love him less. It made her love him more. White calls it Lancelot's fatal blunder. I think that's completely right. It's fatal. Had he not done it, maybe their love would have faded because he would have been out of the court and she would have forgotten about him. But no, there's a constant stream of people coming to the court to prostrate themselves before her. So not only does she never forget about him, but his absence then becomes piquant, right? He's not merely absent and forgettable, he's absent and she desperately desires him to return to thank him for the new captive that has come today. And then there will be one tomorrow and the next day, and her desire for him only grows and grows and grows. He's made the worst possible mistake. It would have been better never to have gone at all and just stayed at the court, and she could have got sick with him or bored with him or worn out with him. But being absent and sending her captives, disastrous.
The musical adaptation, Camelot, which is polarizing, people either love it or hate it, I think does a really fine job of showing the other half of this. White's very focused on Lancelot's point of view, and he doesn't write from women's point of view very often. But in the musical version, Guinevere gets this opening song in which she is talking about entering into this maid marriage, where she regrets that she's not going to get to have any knights doing great feats for her, nobody trying to woo her. 2 knights shall never tilt for me, and let their blood be spilt for me. Right? Where are the simple joys of maidenhood? That's the song. And that's what she finally gets in Lancelot, because he is doing all the fighting for her. And White doesn't characterize it as courtly love, but this is the essence of courtly love. You never have any sexual contact with the great lady, but you do all of your feats for her.
Yes, the idealized version that you'd find in Andreas Capellanus, right? No sex, but lots of sighing.
Yes.
But then, of course, when you read a lot of the romances, not the manuals of courtly love, there is a lot of sex.
Right. Well,
but in the idealized form, right? The idealized form, then the idea is it's never consummated, right? It's just always, dropped handkerchiefs and lingering glances and things like that. But of course, that's not what Lancelot and Guinevere are about. It's far more than just lingering glances and dropped handkerchiefs, and that's the problem. Is that it's not merely that they're in love; it's that they consummate it, and that's treason. for all sorts of, for the reasons we discussed in our Mallory episode, right? It makes it impossible to know whether the issue is legitimate, should there be any. So it's treason against the king's body doubly, right? Against his body politic, which is the solidity, the dependability of the realm, and it's also about his personal body. Right? Taking his wife is to deprive him of his own personal possessions, that to which he is united in matrimony in one body. So it's a defilement. Lancelot is doing this.
The line in Mallory, he had a deeming of it, I think gets translated here into something that is quite well done. You know, White is very much more into exposition than he is in letting the plot tell the story. But here's a really nice moment at the end of chapter 9. Arthur, whose head was still in his hands, raised his eyes. He saw that his friend and his wife were looking at each other with the wide pupils of madness. So he quickly attended to his plate.
Yes, that's it exactly.
He had a deeming of it.
Yes. I mean, Merlin tells Arthur, both in Mallory and here, and Mallory doesn't give us any explanation of how Arthur could forget. White does. He says, you know, Arthur never liked knowing the future, and so he put those things out of his mind because they were a distraction and they were unpleasant. And it's also the character of Arthur, which White has created for us from boyhood, which Mallory does not, is such that we can totally imagine him not being aware and then deliberately making himself unaware, right?
Yeah.
Studied refusal to acknowledge things. You know, his best friend and his wife are having an affair, and he's just not going to look at that or pay any attention to it. And what brings down Camelot eventually, the immediate proximate cause, is that he's eventually forced to confront it. Right? He can't, because of Mordred and Agravain, they refuse to let him look away. In this moment, he can't. He can attend to his plate, and no one's going to come and grab him by the hair and force him to look at his friend and his wife. But that is basically what Mordred and Agravain will do. They will force him to see it. And of course, when that happens, everything explodes. It can no longer be sustained.
There's something else falling apart in chapter 9. This is putting these two things parallel to each other. The falling apart of his marriage, but then also the falling apart of the idealized vision of the Round Table. And he gives a speech in which he says at the end, "I wish I had never invented honor or sportsmanship or civilization." Now, aside from the chauvinism of thinking that the English invented all three of these things, is that Arthur is losing faith in the possibility of what he's set out to do.
Well, that's it, right? He's tried to replace rule by force with cricket, basically. That's the analogy that White uses over and over again, and it's not a bad one. I wonder if the reason cricket became so successful in Britain in the 19th century, where previously they played rounders, and cricket was a United States game, and then that switched in the 19th century, and they swapped. And so cricket became increasingly popular. And when did that happen? What happened in the 19th century? Well, the Victorian medieval revival, this great interest in chivalry. At exactly the same time, cricket becomes the absolute game, the summit of gamesmanship in the British Isles. And I wonder if the things aren't related. Maybe White is onto something here, that there is a sense in which he does it backwards. He says, knighthood is like cricket, but I think it's the other way around. Cricket is like knighthood. It's sublimated, all sorts of sublimated things. That's why we talked about Bradman last week. Cricket is a team game in which, by and large, you don't have to think about the team. It's all about personal ambition. And if you try to be the top of the batting averages, that's good for your team. I mean, there are some exceptions to this, and I don't want UK listeners to get mad. I know a lot about cricket. You don't need to lecture me on cricket. But generally speaking, ambition in cricket is valued. There are people who aren't team players like Kevin Peterson and so on and so forth, and that causes problems. But generally speaking, the ambition is a good thing, and I wonder about that. So this is the analogy, and what is the result? Well, for Arthur, it's a kind of games madness. He calls it games mania, sportsmanship, by which he doesn't mean like the spirit of cricket. He means seeking advantage in the game to an irrational degree and letting other things go by the board. And Arthur says, well, all I really wanted was for people to stop killing maidens and to be reasonable and to not be, to be virtuous. I just wanted people to be virtuous, defend the weak, defend maidens, and not kill people. And what I've got instead now is games mania. Everyone wants to be the top of the averages. Right? Everyone wants to have the best figures. Everyone wants to win all the time, to the point that now they're engaging in unvirtuous activities in order to achieve these goals. And there's also sort of subtle undermining of each other, right? There's rivalries that are forming. And that's what he's getting at, because Lancelot saves Gawain. And then he beats Gawain in a juiced. And he's like, Gawain will never forget this, because you shouldn't have beaten him. They won't let it go. And you got the Pelennor thing going around, right? Pelennor accidentally kills King Lot, and they won't let it go. The games mania has seized them, and it will create factionalism and rancor in the context of sportsmanship. And that's what Arthur is deeply worried about. So he's created a new problem.
I think that mirrors, we were talking about sports being a sublimation of warfare. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a fairly common point and trope that's been made throughout history, is that we do use sports, especially professional sports, as a substitute for warfare. And here, the evolution from jousting in the lists to, cricket on the pitch or football on the field, I think that metaphor carries through. But look at what was happening with warfare in White's time. Mm-hmm. The differences in warfare, how we waged it before the Second World War and after. The idea of total war and a lot of the suspensions of the, we might call it somewhat anachronistically, gentlemanly attitudes of war. There were lines you didn't cross, and in World War II, that line was obliterated. I mean,
up until really in the Great War is where that line gets obliterated. Yes, but you're right. Yes.
Well, and what I was thinking of specifically with World War II was the dropping of an atomic bomb. I mean, civilization ending capacity for destruction.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of gentlemanly combat, though, is already completely gone in World War I. The Great War, trench warfare, the kinds
mustard
of mustard
gas, yeah,
right. Nothing about that allows for individual prowess to matter at all. And we've done several episodes about how the poetry about war is night and day on either side of that conflict.
Yeah, the only hints you really see of it are still valorous in some regard, right? Think about Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade, which is about the Crimean War. And in that context, the Light Brigade's blunder, right? Someone has blundered and sends them to their deaths, and yet it's provided to us in a glorious, their glory shall never fade, writes Tennyson. And then what we see in the context of mechanized warfare, the earliest examples I can think of, like Stephen Crane writing about the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
Things of that sort. Once you get into mechanized warfare, and there's no opportunity for a gallant cavalry charge anymore, that kind of knocks the shine off of warfare, and it elides the ability for the ordinary person to have any prowess whatsoever.
White makes a big deal out of this sports war connection all throughout the Once and Future King. He makes a big point out of romanticizing late medieval wars. He says, the Plantagenets, they had a season for war, and weren't trying to kill people. They were just sort of, it was just the thing to do. Um, it is a bit of an idealized picture of it. Uh, Nevertheless, I think he's onto something in the sense that the level of destruction is orders of magnitude different with modern mechanized war. And Ginny, I think, makes the spot on exact right observation here in this conversation. Um, Arthur's talking about his inability to get the knights to use their might for right. Um, and she says, "You are a strange man, Arthur dear. You fight all the time, and conquer countries, and win battles, and then you say that fighting is a bad thing?" Well, there it is. I mean, yes, that's what he does. That's what his whole life is about.
Well, it's certainly challenging, and I apologize, listeners, if my audio just shifted. I've noticed I was on the wrong microphone for this episode. And last episode, oops. Yeah, disastrous. Another technological blunder, purely my fault. I noticed it because I was pressing the cough button and the cough wasn't going away. So, mea culpa. I'll be more attentive in future. This will only be an issue on the video. It won't be an issue in the audio recording. So if you're listening to this on the podcast and you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. But coming back to the idea of Jenny, yes, Jenny is absolutely right. Because she's not caught up in the mania, right? It's a masculine thing. It's something that the men are doing. The men play sports. The men go out and go on these adventures. It's a mania that seizes them because she's not part of that world. She can kind of see the truth of it from the outside. It seizes on Lancelot too. Later on, I mean, his desire to go on an adventure in the first few chapters to get away from Jenny is, I think, the simple assumption that that's what you do, right? You go on it. That's what men do. They go on adventures. It's how you sublimate your warlike tendency. But he does it later as well. This isn't the only time he goes away from court.
Right.
So where else should we look? Elaine, is there something of interest to you in these chapters?
Just as a passing curiosity, I do like the fact that one of Lancelot's swords is Joyeux. That's a good, quick reference to the matter of France.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. Not in Mallory, but White, of course, has read it and wants to make sure that the readers are aware it exists. I don't think we get any reference to the matter of England at all. That's something that White could have done.
So the other thing that I had written down in my notes, and this sort of takes us towards the back half of these chapters, is the sort of lack of agency that Lancelot has with his actual fall. Like the point of this is supposed to be him as the fallen knight, but when he goes to Elaine, he's not doing it under his own agency. He's under a spell. He's under enchantment.
Yeah. But it's a bit like Arthur's fall as well in the Queen of Air and Darkness, where we're to believe that Arthur is, in a sense, responsible for his own undoing, that his sins come home to roost. But yet, in the moment of describing the fall, all of his agency is sort of erased. She's using a spell, and she seduces him, and there are all these excuses given for why he would be particularly susceptible to this kind of thing. And here, I think it's even more erasure of agency in what happens to Lancelot. I mean, he's tricked. And he's immediately furious about being tricked.
Yeah, he doesn't fall, he's pushed.
Yeah, right.
And that led me to, again, compare this against other versions of Lancelot that I've read. And in general, no one gives Lancelot much agency as a character. He's almost there for plot convenience.
Well, it's the
to
dilemma of being the perfect knight. I mean, it's the narrative is almost trapped with that kind of trope. You know, he can't have too much agency because then he loses his perfection.
Well, that's one of the medieval fascinations, right? Think about Gawain and the Green Knight, which is also about the trap of being perfectly courteous. How do you navigate this dilemma of being faithful to the master of the house with whom you've made this agreement, and also faithful
kissing
to
his
the
wife.
lady, and also not engage in adultery? How do you manage all three of these challenges simultaneously, and then also do it in the context of a challenge to have your head cut off in the not too distant future by a Green Knight? And
One of the
Gawain,
ways that White makes it plausible, or at least more plausible than otherwise would be, is to have Lancelot being extremely naive, and that's sort of tied up with his perfection. So, I mean, in chapter 10, for example, he has to go to his uncle Dap and ask directly, "Is Guinevere in love with me?" And he just doesn't get it. You know? It's too
To which
simple.
Dap responds in the traditionally French fashion, "Go ask her."
Right, exactly.
it's probably the last thing you should do, though. Don't go ask her. Don't do that. Well, on the topic of Elaine, you mentioned that the text provides a lot of excuses. I mean, not only does she bewitch herself to look like Guinevere, but they get him drunk, right? He's completely drunk. Um, he has no reason to expect that anyone there would mislead him. Everyone's been really, really nice, servile even. King Pella's promising to show him the holy dish, and everyone leading him around, giving him whatever he wants, and fating him. And then what happens? Elaine seduces him because she wants to have his baby. And that's the first thing she says. And it infuriates him because if she had just tricked him into having sex with her, then there's no lingering effect, right, other than an emotional one. But she's like, I want to have your baby. And he utterly rejects the child that would come from such a union. Let me see if I can find it. It's at the end of the chapter. Chapter 13. I want to have your baby, said Elaine. I shall call him Galahad, like your first name. She still held the coverlet to her sides with the small bare arms. Lancelot turned upon her in fury. Elaine, he said, if you have a baby, it is your baby. It is unfair to bind me with pity. I am going straight away now, and I hope I shall never see you again. He's furious. But here's the thing.
Well, and
I don't think he's furious because he's been misled. I don't think he's furious because he's been seduced. I don't think he's furious because he's been tricked. And I don't think he's furious because he doesn't like Elaine. He's furious because he has inadvertently betrayed Guinevere. That's why.
Well, he said, this is what he says in that scene. It was treachery. You've betrayed me. Why? You have made me dash, taken from me dash, stolen dash dash. And the narration sort of fills in the gaps that he believes that his virginity, his prowess, and his ability, his potential to perform miracles are all tied together. So that what she's taken is his his extreme strength. It says the strength of 10 men, and the potential that he could perform a miracle.
And we
in his
find
mind,
out, of course, eventually none of this is true.
Right,
But
but this is his own madness, perhaps just like his sense of himself being ugly.
Yeah.
Maybe this is another one of those things.
Well, what struck me as so profound here is that he is mad at Elaine for making him betray his love to Guinevere. But his love to Guinevere is based on betrayal. The betrayal of Arthur, the betrayal of his oaths to Arthur, the betrayal of her marriage to Arthur. It's like, dude, you're already cheating.
Well,
what does it matter?
What if then there's a sense in which if he's a virgin at this point, He's merely like he hasn't consummated his relationship with Guinevere, and he's a virgin. Elaine has taken from him the ability to have his first relationship with Guinevere and be completely, totally true to her in a way that now he can never be, right? Because he'll have been with somebody else. But also, it's like a cracked mirror, right? You can't uncrack it, or a rung bell, you can't unring it. And so now, well, maybe before he was able to keep his relationship with Guinevere chaste, now there's no reason to do so, or less of a reason to do so. I mean, there's still lots of reasons to keep your relationship with Guinevere chaste. But now, like, he's already had sex. So, he might as well have sex. He's already lost his power to work miracles. He's already lost the strength of 10 men. Now he might as well have sex with Guinevere. What's the point of being chaste anymore? Right? You can suddenly there's all these excuses you can make to do the thing that you've always wanted to do but were afraid to do.
In terms of it being a sin, though, is there really a difference between consummating it and having the intention in your heart?
Well, I mean,
biblically,
there's different
no.
degrees of sin, right? I mean, it's venial to have it in your heart, and then you confess it. It's grave to do it, because now you've brought the effect of sin into the world of action, and that means there has to be recompense for it.
It's a distinction not made in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, to even lust after a woman, you've committed adultery in your heart. I also want to zoom in on this one moment of self-pity. Well, there's lots of moments of self-pity from Lancelot, but this particular moment of self-pity, as he's crying here, talking to Elaine about what's happened, and he's shifting all of the blame onto her, and it's all about what he's lost and what she's taken from him. It says, when I was little, I prayed to God that he would let me work a miracle. Only virgins can work miracles. I wanted to be the best knight in the world. I was ugly and lonely. The people of your village said that I was the best knight of the world, and I did work my miracle when I got you out of the water. I did not know it would be my last as well as my first. I mean, it's so melodramatic.
Lee is French.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, it is melodramatic, but it is what Lancelot believes, and it's not a typical belief, right? I mean, it's a traditional belief. He really thinks this. And Elaine's response is, you're going to work lots of miracles,
And she adds, just a few lines later down, haven't I given you something too? I was a maiden, Lancelot. In other words, it's not just all about you. Like, this was also significant for me. Of course, by treachery and deception, and it's rape.
Yeah. It's interesting. We can't know it at this point in the text. Lancelot can't know it. We can. Galahad is going to be the best knight in the world, in a sense, right? He's going to be the most pure
He gets the
knight
Grail
in the world. He's going to achieve the Grail. And then, having no other function, he will disappear. That's what he's for, right? Galahad is for achieving the Grail, and then he'll go up to heaven with the Grail, because once achieved, what use would the world be? So he'll be assumed into heaven, like Elijah and the Virgin Mary. So, I mean, she will give him something when she has this son of inestimable value. At least you would think that Galahad would, or that Lancelot would think so. I mean, that's the sort of thing he would value. He would value having a son like Galahad if he were to know what kind of a son it would be. A perfectly pure, the truly perfect model of knighthood. Never sullied, never broken, and also a virgin. And yet, of course, he doesn't know that. So he's very bitter. And he doesn't acknowledge the son that he'll have, who will be the perfect knight. Not quite right there. That's one of those things, that Merlin or White picks up on. And Lancelot, and everything's not quite right. That was the opportunity to say, he is still my son, and I'll still love him and care for him, even if I'm angry about the circumstances in which he was conceived. But Lancelot says, no, I'm going to have nothing to do with this or with you. He's furious.
Yeah, he's disowned the child before the child's even been born. And he has no, at this point, no compassion for the child. It's not as if it's the child's fault, the circumstances of its birth or its conception.
Well, his So these chapters this week are largely about miracles, which we talked a little bit about last week. We talked about Sir Uri. And Guinevere is, like you, Drew, not particularly interested in Lancelot's desire to work a miracle. She thinks it's, I don't know if she'd I'd go so far as to say narcissistic, but she thinks it's foolish and pointless. And vain. Maybe vain is the right word.
Yeah.
But I'll have this passage. They have a conversation, Lancelot and the Queen, in chapter 14. And it goes something like this. Lancelot tells Guinevere about lying to one of his brothers. And he didn't want to give his brother his very perfect arrows. His brother's arrows were all warped. And so when his brother said, can I borrow some of your arrows? He said, no, I don't have any. I've lost them. Because he didn't want to share his perfection. I think that's another interesting... It's a revealing story because it goes back to the idea of Elaine stealing some perfection from him. Guinevere says, little liar. Lancelot continues, I know I was. Afterwards, I had the most dreadful remorse for having told him the lie, and I thought I had been untrue to God. So I went out to a bed of stinging nettles that was on the moat and put my arrow arm into them as a punishment. I rolled up my sleeve and put it right in. Poor Lance, what an innocent you must have been. But Jenny, they didn't sting me. I am sure I am right in remembering that they didn't sting me. Do you mean there was a miracle? I don't know. It is difficult to be sure. I was such a dreamy boy, always living in a make-up world where I was Arthur's greatest knight. I may have made it up about the nettles, but I think I can remember the shock when they didn't sting. I am sure it was a miracle, said the Queen decidedly. Jenny, all my life I have wanted to do miracles. I have wanted to be holy. I suppose it was ambition or pride or some other unworthy thing. It was not enough for me to conquer the world. I wanted to conquer heaven, too. I was so grasping that it was not enough to be the strongest knight. I had to be the best as well. That is the worst of making daydreams. It is why I tried to keep away from you. I knew that if I was not pure, I could never do miracles. And I did do a miracle, too. A splendid one. I got a girl out of some boiling water who was enchanted into it. She was called Elaine. And then I lost my power. Now that we are together, I shall never be able to do my miracles anymore. He did not like to tell her the full truth about Elaine, for he thought that it would hurt her feelings to know that he had come to her as the second. Why not? Because we are wicked. Personally, I have never done a miracle, said the Queen, rather coldly, so I have less to regret. But Jenny, I am not regretting anything. You are my miracle, and I would throw them overboard all over again for the sake of you. I was only trying to tell you about the things I felt when I was small. Well, I can't say I understand. Can't you understand wanting to be good at things? No, I can see that you would not have to. It is only people who are lacking or bad or inferior who have to be good at things. You have always been full and perfect, so you had nothing to make up for. But I have always been making up. I feel dreadful sometimes, even now with you, when I know that I can't be the best knight any longer. Then we had better stop, and you can make a good confession and do some more miracles. You know we can't stop. The whole thing seems fanciful to me, said the Queen. I don't understand it. It seems unpractical and selfish. I know I am selfish. I can't help it. I try not to be, but how can I help being what I was made? Oh, can't you understand what I'm telling you? I was lonely when I was small, and I worked hard at my exercises. I used to tell myself that I would be a great explorer and cross the Kharasmian waste, or I would be a great king like Alexander or St. Louis, or a great healer. I would find out a balsam which cured wounds and give it away free. Perhaps I would be a saint and salve wounds just by touching them, or I would find something important, a relic of the Two Cross or the Holy Grail or something like that. These were my dreams, Jenny. I'm only telling you what I used to daydream about. They are what I mean by miracles, which are lost now. I have given you my hopes, Jenny, as a present from my love. Well, this goes back to what you said last week, Drew, about Lancelot's wanting to work miracles. And he's finally given the ability to work, setting aside the nettles, he's finally given the ability to work a real miracle in the saving of Elaine from the pot of boiling water. And now he thinks the ability is gone. But what evidence has he had to that effect? I mean, no one's come and said, no angel of the Lord has come down and said, no more miracles.
It's all in his mind, which is what Jenny keeps trying to tell him. Like, get out of your own head, dude.
And she is pointing out here that by his own admission, he has not been perfect and sinless.
Right.
Indeed
And
not.
even he acknowledges, like, I did all of this whenever I was young, not out of a good will, out of the goodness of my heart, but out of selfish desire.
And he always twists that into more opportunity for self-obsession and self-pity. I know I'm so selfish. I'm the selfishest person that ever was. Like, God, he's too much. Also, one thing I don't want to miss in chapter 14, a little bit earlier, is the only time that another character calls him ugly.
Oh.
And it's Arthur. Arthur has asked Lancelot to stay behind while he goes off, stay behind and take care of things. And of course, Lancelot doesn't want to do that because then there's an opportunity for him and Guinevere. And he says, Arthur says to Lancelot, how could I trust anybody more? You would only have to show that mug of yours outside the dog kennel and all the thieves would run away at once.
Oh, that's a good point. Well, yeah. But is he talking about how ugly he is, or is he referring to the fact that Lancelot, by sight, scares everyone away because they know who he is?
See, that's the studied ambiguity of it. So we still don't know.
Right? We can't be explicit. We can only dance around. Well, in the chapter I've just read, that chapter ends with that really poignant, Lancelot saying, "Look, I've given up. I'd give up all my miracles again. I've given you my hopes, Jenny," because his hopes were to have miracles, and I've given them up. I'm putting them in your hands. And what has happened? Well, he hasn't been entirely truthful with her. He's danced around the Elaine thing because he didn't want to hurt her feelings. And that's immediately what she finds out in the next chapter.
Yes.
And White gives us, I think, the best possible description of suppressed rage at being, jilted. Right. His description of Guinevere breathing through her nose.
Yes.
And red hot thumbs pushing behind her eyeballs. Guinevere began to breathe through her nose. She was feeling as if there were two red thumbs behind her eyeballs trying to push them out. And she did not want to look at him. She was trying not to make a scene. And she dreaded her heart. She had shame and hatred of what she might say, but she could not help saying it. She was like a person swimming in a rough sea.
That's a great description.
The barely managed control, right? And the fury at having been lied to, and as she thinks, having been misled.
So this is why you lost your miracles. It was all lies about you giving them to me.
Exactly. We ended the last chapter with that, and then immediately it's shattered in the next chapter. I think that's quite well done by White.
Well, and
this all comes about because of a misogynist, Sir Bors, right? Sir Bors, the misogynist, who comes and brings this news. He does not like the queen. He doesn't like women in White's version. And in both White and Mallory, it's Bors who will eventually be called upon to champion the queen.
I love that the sentence in which he accuses somebody else of misogyny has misogyny in it. He says, but unfortunately, he was a misogynist, and like most people of that sort, he had the female failing of indiscretion.
And I do think it interesting here, though, that the only two characters who come off not badly in this entire exchange are Guinevere and Elaine.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
Guinevere is at her most perceptive and insightful here,
Yes.
and Elaine, again pointing out to him all the good things that could result of this, and
But
it's almost like
Elaine
it's
has to come off bad. She seduces him. She tricks him. I mean, she's a rapist by modern standards, right?
It's hard to excuse what Elaine has done, although she's
I think White is being sympathetic to Elaine in this, because he's making her perform the cruel action that the legend requires, but I think White is aware he's instrumentalizing her, and there is a certain sympathy for Elaine and her plight that White puts in there.
he wants us to think that Elaine couldn't help but do it, that it sort of
Right.
happened.
Well, this week's reading concludes with Elaine. She comes to Camelot. And in a way, this is analogous to Mordred and Agravain, right? When she wasn't in Camelot, it wasn't necessary to deal with Elaine. You could pretend Elaine was in the past and it's just a thing that happened and we can kind of forget about it. But Elaine will not be forgot. And she will not accept Lancelot not being a part of Galahad's life. So she comes to Camelot and forces the queen to deal with her, forces Guenever to deal with her, forces Lancelot to deal with her. And at first, this seems all right in a twisted and deeply unpleasant way, but it seems workable. And Lancelot even acknowledges Galahad. So we have this at the end of chapter 17. Elaine turned the cradle towards Lancelot and moved back so that he could see. My son. They stood looking down at the fresh thing, helpless and only half alive. They were strong, as the poet sings, and it was weak. One day they would be weak, and it strong. Galahad, said Elaine, and she leaned over the wrappings, making the foolish gestures and meaningless sounds which mothers delight to use when their babies are beginning to pay attention. Galahad clenched his fist and hit himself in the eye with it, an achievement which seemed to give pleasure to the women. Lancelot watched them in amazement. My son, he thought. It is a part of me, yet it is fair. It does not seem to be ugly. How can you tell with babies? He held out his right finger to Galahad, putting it inside the fat palm of his hand which clutched it. The hand looked as if it had been fitted to the arm by a cunning doll-maker. There was a deep crease round the wrist. Oh, Lancelot, cried Elaine. She tried to throw herself into his arms, but he pushed her off. He looked at Bryson over her shoulder with fear and exasperation. He made a wild, senseless sound and rushed out of the room. Elaine, unsupported, sank down beside the bed and began to sob more than ever. Bryson, standing rigid as she had stood to bear Sir Lancelot's glare, looked at the closed door with an inscrutable expression. And then he's summoned at the beginning of the next chapter with Elaine to the queen's chamber. And Guinevere is still in an awful state.
But Guinevere has said the most sensible thing of perhaps anybody in this book so far. I mean, the Ill-Made Knight book. When Elaine comes to court, she says to Lance, she is the mother of your baby and she is unmarried. We two can't ever be married. I want you to be able to marry her if you would like it, because that is the only thing which can be done. And he tries to interrupt her, and she says, no, Lance, we must be sensible. I want you to keep away from me while she is here, and to find out whether you could love her after all. It is the least that I can do for you. She's exactly right. And it is
Yep.
that it's the most selfless thing somebody's done in this book so far.
Does she mean it? Elaine doesn't think so. So the denouement is that Lancelot and Elaine are summoned to Guinevere's chambers. Lancelot has the insane idea that he's going to persuade Guinevere to make a clean break with Arthur and they can run off together. I mean, this is lunacy, right? What he gets instead is all the suppressed rage of Guinevere that has been building up since she found out about Elaine back in chapter 15, end of 14, beginning of 15, I forget which. And we're treated to this. Lancelot's madness. Good God, it's so violent in this, but I'm going to read it in full, and then we have to be done, listeners, because we're nearly out of time. But here's what it is. Oh my God, it goes back and back. This is not a pleasant chapter to read. She has found out that he was with Elaine the previous night, seeing his baby. Remember, they did not have sex or anything of that sort, and he pushed her away and ran out of the room. But Guinevere has found out. Where did you go last night? Don't tell me, shouted the queen, moving her hand so they could see a ball of handkerchief in it, which she had torn to pieces. Traitor! Traitor! Get out of my castle with your strumpet! Last night, said Lancelot. His head was whirling with a desperation which neither of the women noticed. Don't speak to me! Don't lie to me! Go! Elaine said calmly, Sir Lancelot was in my room last night. My woman Bryson brought him in the dark. Look how the deliberate ambiguity of that, right? Oh, it's so awful. This is why I say Elaine doesn't come out of this entirely unsullied. She's deliberately playing on Guinevere's fears. The queen began pointing at the door. She made stabbing movements at it with her finger, and in her trembling, her hair began to come down. She looked hideous. Get out! Get out! And you too, you animal! How dare you speak so in my castle? How dare you admit it to me? Take your fancy man and go! Lancelot was breathing heavily and looking upon the queen with a fixed stare. He might have been unconscious. He thought he was coming to you, said Elaine. She had her hands folded together and watched the queen passively. The old lie! It is not a lie, said Elaine. I could not live without him. Bryson helped me to pretend. Guinevere ran up to her with tottering steps. She wanted to hit Elaine in the mouth, but the girl did not move. It was as if she was hoping that Guinevere would hit her. Liar! Screamed the queen. She ran back to Lancelot, where he had sat down on a chest and was staring blankly at the floor with his head between his hands. She caught hold of his mantle and began pushing or heaving him toward the door, but he would not move. So you taught her the story. Why couldn't you think of a new one? You might have given me something interesting. I suppose you thought the old stale stuff would do. Jenny, he said without looking up. The queen tried to spit on him, but she had never practiced spitting. How dare you call me Jenny? You are reeking of her still. I am the Queen of England. I am not your trull. Jenny, get out of my castle, screamed the queen at the top of her voice. Never show your face in it again, your evil, ugly, beast-like face. Lancelot suddenly said to the floor in a loud voice, Galahad. Then he took down his hands from his head and looked up so they could see the face she spoke of. It had a surprised look, and one of the eyes had begun to squint. He said more quietly, Jenny, but he looked like a blind man. The queen opened her mouth to say something, though nothing came out. Arthur, he said. Then he gave a loud shriek and jumped straight out of the window, which was on the first floor. They could hear him crash into some bushes with a crump and crackle of boughs, and then he was running off through the trees and shrubbery with a sort of loud, warbling cry like hounds hunting. The hullabaloo faded into the distance, and there was silence in the chamber with the women. Elaine, who was now as white as the queen had been, but still held herself proud and upright, said, You have driven him mad. His wits must have been weak. Guinevere said nothing. Why have you driven him mad? asked Elaine. You have a fine husband of your own, the greatest in the land. You are a queen with honor and happiness and a home. I had no home and no husband, and my honor was gone too. Why would you not let me have him? The queen was silent. I loved him, said Elaine. I bore a fine son for him, who will be the best knight of the world. Elaine, said Guinevere, go away from my court. I am going. Guinevere suddenly caught her by the skirt. Don't tell anybody, she said quickly. Don't say anything about what happened. It will be his death if you do. Elaine freed the skirt. Did you expect I would? But what are we to do? Cried the queen. Is he mad? Will he get better? What will happen? Ought we to do something? What are we to say? Elaine would not stay to talk with her. At the door, however, she turned with a trembling lip. Yes, he is mad, she said. You have won him, and you have broken him. What will you do with him next? When the door was closed, Guinevere sat down. She dropped her tattered handkerchief. Then slowly, deeply, primitively, she began to cry. She put her face in her hands and throbbed with sorrow. Sir Bors, who did not care for the queen, once said to her, Fie on your weeping, for ye weep never but when there is no boot. He says that in the Knight of the Cart sequence. All right.
It's such a powerful scene.
Incredible.
I'm afraid I have to dash now, but I'm so glad you read that in full, and you read it very well.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Farewell, Drew. Well, I want to close with that scene because it's where we ended our reading this week. It's also immensely powerful, and it shows.
And I think yeah.
It's these two women who are so very different, and Lancelot's
but together
attitude
they're the
toward them
whole.
is so very different, but they both have the same desire, which is they want the love of Lancelot.
And together they have one complete life. So Guinevere has the passion with Lancelot, the status, but she doesn't have his child. She doesn't have the ability to be with him. Elaine has the child, the ability to be with him, but Lancelot feels no passion for her.
Indeed. And I'm glad you said the ability to be with, right? Like, Lancelot can never have a real public relationship with Guinevere. It can only ever be a treacherous secret. Not merely a secret, but one that would destroy him if it were ever public.
Right, realm-destroying secret.
He can have anything he wants with Elaine. Guinevere
doesn't want
already
it.
has everything. And I think Elaine is right in this, right? We might deplore her methods, which are designed to exacerbate the situation. That's what she's doing. There's a reason why Lancelot goes mad, and it's because Elaine is making things worse, right? She goes in there implying that Lancelot slept with her, implying that, he's with me. She didn't need to say any of these things. She could have explained the situation in a much more reasonable, mollifying way, but she did it in an inflammatory way that is not strictly untrue. So she's made everything worse. But she is absolutely right when she tells Guinevere, you already have a husband. Your husband is King Arthur.
Yeah, you're queen of the entire realm.
Yeah. What more could you possibly want? And the implication there is that there is an insatiableness or a greed on Guinevere's part, right? Like, Why do you have to have Lancelot too? Why can't you just let me have him? And here I think is a place where Elaine, although she's completely right in this objection, she's also completely wrong. Because Guinevere can't simply let Lancelot have Elaine. Guinevere tried to make Lancelot go marry Elaine, and he wouldn't.
Exactly. She did exactly what Elaine claims.
Indeed. And so this is White is a very beguiling writer. And you read this section and you find yourself agreeing with Elaine because she's right about her assessment of Guinevere. And then you get carried away and you agree with her about her assessment of Lancelot's agency in it. And that's where Elaine is wrong. She's not right about that, right? Guinevere can't simply let... I mean, even if she had driven Lancelot away, I don't think Lancelot would have gone to Elaine. And if he had done so, it would have been out of nothing more than a sense of duty, right? To make her an honorable woman, as we would say today, right? That would have been the
Neither Guinevere nor Lancelot can change the way they feel about each other.
Exactly. He doesn't love Elaine.
They've tried. It doesn't work.
He detests her because of the means that she used to seduce him in the first place. That made it impossible. Like, you can't... He's not going to fall in love with his rapist at the end of the day. And there is no world where Guinevere can let him or force him or make him go to Elaine. So Elaine is completely wrong about that, although she is right about Guinevere and about the nature of their relationship. This is so difficult for Lancelot because he can't make Guinevere understand his lack of feeling for Elaine, because Elaine is convinced Guinevere with her body by having a son, which convinces, like, there's a sense that you think that Guinevere thinks she wouldn't have conceived if Lancelot didn't care for her, right?
Right.
And so there's this terrible predicament where nothing Lancelot says can be believed.
Well, and Guinevere's own childlessness is a feature in other versions of it. I mean, the only version I have, and I hate going back to it because of the author, but the only version that really examines the psychology of the women in the Arthurian legend is The Mist of Avalon. And there, Guinevere's childlessness is a part of her entire psychological undoing there. She cannot give Arthur the heir that he needs. I mean, the one thing that the medieval woman had to do for the king was to produce the heir, and she feels like a failure in that regard. And then, you have Lancelot one night, and all of a sudden this strumpet has an heir.
Indeed, right? The very first time. And it must, for Guinevere, there's a sense in which it is a deep wound.
Mm-hmm.
Her femininity is bound up in her ability to give birth, and she simply can't. So there's a way in which Elaine will always be more of a woman than Guinevere, more of a complete woman, a whole woman.
Yeah, going back to your point, she believes that there must really be some love between Lancelot and Elaine because she knows that her marriage to Arthur is loveless.
Exactly.
And that's what she's blaming her inability to conceive on is, well, if there was real love there, then we would have a child.
That's it exactly. That's the psychological, trap into which she's fallen. And it's not true, but, nevertheless, she absolutely believes it, and all the evidence seems to point in that direction. And this makes her suspicious of Lancelot. It makes her hateful of Elaine. And Lancelot's inability to answer this, because it's basically science for them, right? It's inescapable. The evidence is all there, and he can't answer it. There's nothing he can say. And so he literally goes out of his mind. He loses his wits and jumps out the window and runs off. And his last two words, I think it's important that they're Galahad, because this is this beautiful son whom I think he actually does love now that he's...
Oh, absolutely.
Is the proof of his infidelity to Guinevere. And Elaine knows, as of course she must, that he will be the best knight in the world. He will be the achievement of the thing that Lancelot always wanted to be, but couldn't be. Well, there we have to stop, listeners, but we hope that you've enjoyed this. We're going to be returning to the Ill-Made Knight next week in chapters 19 through 25, which will be the third of 5 episodes on this part of the tetralogy. We hope that you've enjoyed this. And if you are, you might want to head over to criticalreadings.com and click that Become a Patron button at the top of the page, which will ensure that all of our server and hosting costs are paid, keeping all of our podcasts ad-free and online for all of our listeners. And it will also get you access to our Discord channel, where there is early access to the podcasts and discussions on a wide variety of topics, not just about text, but also about music and opera and all sorts of other fine things and translations. And you can also vote in our Reader's Choice episodes there. So please do that, and we'll put your name in the credits for as long as you're a supporter. Well, with that, we are done for this week. Now, Drew has already departed, but I would like to thank my other panelist this week, which was Lane Haygood.
As always.
Thank you so much, Lane. That's it for us. We'll be back next week with the next third of 5 parts of The Ill-Made Knight from The Once and Future King. Until then, from all of us at Critical Readings, Godspeed.